Welcome to Corporate Competitor, presented by Forbes Books, the podcast where the world's greatest executives share how the lessons they learned playing sports shaped their leadership. After more than 200 episodes with CEOs and senior leaders like Chick-fil-A Chairman Dan Cathy, Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, and former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, one thing is clear. Whether they were inducted into their sports hall of fame or hung up their cleats after high school, sports has been a powerful, shared foundation for success. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and each week, in partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, we bring you genuine, authentic, fireside chat-like conversations with influential leaders so you can apply their insights to elevate your leadership. With me for today's episode is Oscar Munoz, former CEO and chairman of United Airlines, who led an extraordinary turnaround. Oscar took over during United's darkest days, struggling with a stalled merger, low customer satisfaction, and poor employee morale. Within 5 years, he transformed United into a top-performing airline by prioritizing employee trust and teamwork. A former volleyball and football player, Oscar's competitive spirit and perseverance were essential, especially early in his tenure when he faced a life-threatening heart attack that later required a transplant, all while leading a workforce of more than 90,000. Today, Oscar sits on the boards of Salesforce, CBRE, and Fidelity Investments, continuing his legacy of leadership. Make sure to check out corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes for my notes from today's session. You'll find my favorite quotes and reflection questions to help you apply today's insights.
Leadership is not about you, but of the people you lead. If you believe that and embrace that, succession is easy. Succession is hard because the leader doesn't want to leave. We see that play out all the time. Look at these senior executives who are very visible in the world. They're beginning to think that they are indeed these deities. They don't realize how much the institution and the brand supports their very being. Leadership is never, and I mean never, and I repeat never, never about you, but about the people you lead with.
Oscar, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's so good to be here. I'm honored and humbled. Great to meet you.
I'm excited to explore your journey. Born in Mexico, lived with your grandmother, you frequently moved around. I know you've spoken about the concept of familia, family, becoming a prominent theme in your life. Can you tell us about that time and how those challenges shaped you?
Thanks for asking that question. It's funny, up until writing the book a couple years ago, I really hadn't shared that part of my life. It's nice to have the freedom to really embrace my heritage and my upbringing as to how it led me to be the leader that I've become. My mom was a single mom. I never knew my father. She left northern Mexico to join my brother, who was in Los Angeles and would come back to get me at some point in time, was the premise. So I lived with my grandmother, who did not have a job per se, had lost her husband. We did not have a home per se, which was, oh my God, he's homeless. No. If you know anything about the Latino community, you're never without a home. Familia, it's a deeply resonant dynamic that most people have. So we did. We went from town to town and people took us in. I spent a lot of time with her traveling, little dusty roads. Didn't quite understand the impact that it would have on me later. I've learned to use terms like latent or dormant values because this woman, Don, all the human ideals we want to have ourselves and we really appreciate in others, she had all of them. She was kind and caring, so empathetic, never blamed a single person in her life, always taking the upper road, honesty, integrity, worked hard, despite the difficulties of losing her husband and not having all that stuff, was a very faith-based person, as you might expect, but importantly, always smiled, holding her grizzled hand as we walked down these dusty roads. It was so comforting. My personal confidence about who I was and what I could achieve was from her. We called her Mama Josefina. When I leaned back, and so many serious occurrences in my professional and personal life what would my grandmother do?
Yeah.
You look back, it's like, okay, she would probably just not do this or that. It was very helpful.
So you used the phrase earlier, you talked about dormant values, gathering values then that would play themselves out in your life later. What were some of those dormant values that played its way out later?
They're latent and dormant because you don't know them until you're faced with this incredible sort of decision when United had an incident where a customer was dragged and beaten on an aircraft. I became globally infamous
Right.
because my initial response was, for a lot of different reasons, bad. It was awful. But it's never too late to do the right thing.
Mm.
You know that phrase, it's lonely at the top. For all of us that have been in that position, I mean, there was literally no one to turn to. And it's like anything and everything you say is going to be magnified times 100.
Yeah.
And that transition is where Mama Josefina comes in, prepping for what was a very large multi-million audience on Good Morning America to talk about this event, was how to, spin and distance and tell the right facts that pointed to the fact that United wasn't actually involved in any of this circumstances other than our brand and our name. It didn't feel right. And that night, I did fall to my knees. I looked upwards, not because I'm a pious person, but there's nowhere else to look.
Mm.
And I thought of her.
Yeah.
I thought of her values. I mean, there's this issue of never, ever blaming someone else. And in essence, the training and coaching I'd gotten the day before was, for lack of a better term, how to sort of point the finger to someone else.
How to deflect.
Yeah, how to deflect and how to do it, in a way that was going to be articulate and thoughtful. And people would say,
Right.
It just didn't feel right. You can imagine the pressure on the brand of our company, my personal brand. There was a lot of question about my ability to lead an airline, not having had tens of years of industry experience. So there was a ton of things riding on this. But the value that shone through all of that was my grandmother's desire to be honest. When asked the tough question, I said, I let the policies and procedures of running an airline get in the way of treating another human being the way they should.
Wow.
That should never and will never happen again. Now, the producers on that end are like, oh my God, he just said he's responsible.
Yeah.
Well, how do you follow that?
Oh my God.
And the CorpCom and legal team behind me who were like, oh my God, he's not supposed to say that. But it turned out to be not only the right thing to do, but also the right thing to do for our business. Okay, he's accepted this, he's taken it on. They put plans in place to never happen again. Now, initially seen as a horrible response to a crisis, now it's taught in the business schools. It's like, hey, it's never too late to do the right thing.
Wow. Boy, I tell you, I'm sure when you were looking up, she was looking back down.
Yeah, I thank her every day for that.
Never too late to do the right thing. I love that. So your mother's ahead of you in California, but ultimately you moved to California for high school where you played football, you ran track, played volleyball for the La Quinta Aztecs. Do you have a memorable story from that window of time of you and maybe even a coach who had impact on you in that window?
Oh, all of us that have played sports just remember those times very fondly. My senior year, my second to last game, we were on tear. I played wide receiver. I ran back. I did a bunch of different things. And running back a kick, as I went down, I was hit and I felt that tingle through your body.
Mm.
I laid there and I could not move. The instant thought that I had was, I don't want to miss my last game. I knew the reality that I was never going to play organized football again, thinking that I would miss my last game, which I ended up indeed. It was one of those moments where, thank goodness that I have a lot of other things to work through. And more importantly, thankful for the camaraderie and all the things that you did. And our coach, Bruce Smith, who was actually a legendary tennis coach, was just a Vince Lombardi-like fellow. And, all of us that have read Jerry Kramer's book, Instant Replay, and they sort of physically resembled each other, but certainly from a philosophical perspective. And coach, besides being a really tough coach, was always ahead of his time in letting his players know key life events in a way that we all kind of snickered and laughed. But he would sit down and have conversations with us as a team.
Right.
He was just a meaningful coach, but he was a tough one. And he always found me not serious enough for the sport. It's like, Oscar, you're always laughing and enjoying it. You're supposed to be intense.
I know we had a laugh about your team
Yeah.
photo. Everybody
Yeah.
else has got the football grimace on, and there's Oscar behind the
With a
back.
big smile and my big, long, flowing afro-ish hair. But I remember one time in practice, he got upset at me because I was just being too loosey-goosey. So as a wide receiver, he lines up against me like, I'm going to teach this kid. I'm in pads. He's not, of course. Being the little smart aleck that I was, I did my little spin move coming out of my position, and I got around him, and he's like, do it again. And I think he beat me pretty badly the second time. So just all those memories and your teammates, how you help each other out when people get injured, relying on other folks. Organized sports are such a wonderful learning, even if you do it at a lower level, even if you're not the best at it necessarily. It was just the practice, the discipline.
You learn how to win, you learn how to lose.
Yeah. And a lot of humility because there's always someone taller, faster, better at you do it. You just realize that it's just the way the world works. And you learn how to work with them and accept that.
Yeah. You grew up as the eldest of 9. Your family was so big, you actually had to eat in shifts at the table. So it's no surprise to me that when you would rise to CEO of United Airlines, your strength was in bridging that gap between people. And you had this great motto: trust travels at the speed of transparency.
Yeah. United, when I took over, was at a pretty low place. We had 8 CEOs in the previous 10 years.
Wow.
For our frontline employees, you can imagine the impact on them. First of all, it's so distant from them, but things trickle down and there's a new leader and he has this view and you're going to do this. And there's new axioms that come out and new taglines that the company works. When you go through that many folks, you become a little disillusioned, disenfranchised, and certainly disengaged. I could see that and I could feel that. So when asked at an earnings call, hey, what are you going to do, Oscar? They're expecting to hear, we're going to fire people and shut things down and all those things that are spreadsheet oriented from a business perspective, all things which, of course, strategy and business has to be obviously work. But I just could sense from my early interactions with a lot of our employees that there was something much deeper. And I said, I don't know yet. We've been on a slide for a while. I'm going to spend the next 30 to 60 days talking to the very people that run this business day to day, the people that check you in, the people that fly your aircraft, that serve you coffee, that handle your bags and maintain your aircraft. I suspect they have some insights that would be interesting to share. And if I'm ever going to fix this, I'm going to have to involve them in this process. What better way than to go out and talk to them? You can imagine these people when you see them and you talk to them, hey, Don, how you doing? It's like, who are you? Why are you talking to me? I ain't going to tell you, Jack. I don't know where it's going to go. If I say something wrong, my body, it's all those things that people are just fearful. Transparency builds trust.
Yeah.
When I would approach you, I would look at your lanyard or something distinguishing about you personally that you were trying to project as an individual and ask you about them. I remember one person had a Dallas Cowboy lanyard. Oh, I hate the Cowboys, right? He's taken aback, but all of a sudden, it's 2 guys talking to each other as opposed to the CEO talking to somebody that runs something in the end. Conversely, you had people that had pictures of their family, or my son's a proud graduate. They have a college university emblem of some sort. This is a person that probably grew up poor without college, but they've worked to get their child to college. And you get somebody talking about themselves, and then you share your story. Well, that begins to build, that transparency and openness. What came out of that was this trust factor. I have 100,000 employees. Like, Oscar, how did you talk to all of them? You didn't. You talked to one person, but they talked to their work group. They talked to their family.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this 8 CEOs that were all the same and didn't do anything, there's a thematic that this guy appears to be different. My questions to them came after all of this. I didn't jump in and say, well, Don, tell me what's wrong with the company. We built this quick level of connectivity. And then I was able to ask, listen, what do you think? You ask it in a way that's easy to answer to. Boy, I learned so much. And while there were clearly specifics, what I got a better sense of, and you can only get this kind of sense from a personal interaction, I could feel this level of disengagement. We had lost, in essence, the trust of our employees. Whatever we were going to do in order to convince them to go along, it was going to take a lot of that building of trust. And that became sometime later the main thrust of our turnaround strategy. All of a sudden, the company were like, oh my God, this is new. I am feeling the pride back in this company. And importantly, because of the conversations I was having out there, I think they felt part of the solution.
We just had Coach Mike Krzyzewski from Duke on.
Yeah.
And he talked about the power of listening tours, that in moments of transition, don't declare what you're going to do. Go spend time listening first. And I just thought 30 to 60 days spent and probably was among the most important window of time in your entire leadership.
Yeah. When I first announced I was doing that, I was on an earnings call. We always have the Bloomberg screen.
Right.
That's an immediate mechanism to give you feedback on what you said.
Which you probably don't want in an earnings call, because in that moment you're going, God, I shouldn't have said that.
I mean, take whatever advantages you can. But I remember when somebody asked this long-winded question, like trying to put me on the spot about what are you going to do? And my answer was, I don't know. You watch the Bloomberg screen just. And as I talked about the listening tours, it was going to be a 60 to 90 day to give me some time. But knowing how the first, I shrunk it down to 30 to 60 days just that gives it. Yeah.
This episode for us is actually kind of special because we have a future episode in which we're going to get a chance to interview your successor at United, Scott Kirby. We've never done that before. We've never had back-to-back leaders, but obviously succession is an important part. You talked about 8 leaders over 10 years prior to you. Then, as you knew it was time to pass the mantle, I'm going to assume you spent time preparing Scott to take over.
Yeah, the process of succession and the mechanics are one thing. People don't always talk about how difficult it is for the incumbent leader to, in effect, find the best, if not better, source of leadership than you are and start that clock ticking.
Right.
Leadership is never, and I mean never, I repeat, never about you, but about the people you lead with. If you believe that and embrace that, the concept of succession is easy. Succession is hard because the leader doesn't want to leave.
Right.
We see that play out all the time.
We see it at Disney right now.
Yeah, I just had that question live on stage. I know all those players and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
It's a very heady world, especially with Bob and that world of Hollywood and all the power that it drives you. The danger is you become vulnerable to believing things people say. When you're at the top, you are always funny. You're always smart. You're always looking good. And then all of a sudden, everything you say is just deeply brilliant and insightful.
Yeah.
I had a boss that I worked with a long, long time ago at Coca-Cola, great CEO and leader in his own time, Roberto Goizueta, as kind of his chief of staff. I'd have a lot of private time with him. And he'd always look at these senior executives who were very visible in the world. And he would always say, they're beginning to think that they are indeed these deities. They don't realize how much the institution and the brand supports their very being. So don't take yourself so seriously, but take over an organization with a history that we had and my lack of deep experience in an airline space. The financial community was certainly parroting that everywhere. So we had to figure out not so much a succession leader for me, but the right people on your team to make the right decisions. I think I was on Jim Cramer shortly after we made the decision, and he was asking me, "Oh, how did you pick?" Listen, when LeBron James shows up at your practice, you let him play. Bring it on. Scott was that kind of mind, and he was number 2 at a company, and there was a lot of perception about his ability to lead and his style. I spent a lot of time with him before he made this decision and realized that his intelligence and acumen were great, and the personal development side just was something nobody had ever talked to him about. So we really came to a wonderful conclusion that together we could make each other better.
Mm-hmm.
The books will tell that indeed I became a better CEO for it. He became a better president and CEO candidate. The trick is, Don, you got to start right away. The difficult part is doing it as an individual. It's like, okay, can I just enjoy this for a while?
You're saying you have to start the day you step into the office thinking about who's going to succeed you.
Yeah. There's several people we all know that have taken new roles, as highly qualified and ballyhooed as they are to come in these roles. The thought with your board is like, listen, on our first meeting, I'm going to present to you my first sense of what succession could look like in this company.
Wow.
If you start it that way, it's a powerful thing because it puts you as a leader in the right place. This guy or woman is truly a leader who's thinking long-term. Leadership is not about you, but at the people you lead.
Yeah.
The people at Starbucks, the people at Boeing, the people at Disney, 2 to 3 generations of people that are going to be there. You deserve as a leader to put the best person in front of them. And you can't start soon enough
Yeah.
because they're not necessarily available.
So once the process has started to sink in there, how do you balance leaving your mark? Everybody wants to do that. Every leader wants to leave their mark while ensuring that the next leader has the freedom to innovate and evolve.
Yeah.
How have you navigated that?
The British have a great phrase, horses for courses. My style, my listening tour, my empathetic outreach, my bridging of differences between the unions and management, getting everybody's input and focus groups and customers and analysts, all was part of what the company needed so badly because it had been so maligned by so many different levels of leadership and crisis and things that they've had to manage with. Um, you have to run a business as well.
Mhm.
I very much knew that my limited experience in this space was not going to have me move that strategic stuff forward. So how do we find the best people that are going to do that? Yeah, it had to start early. So for Scott and I, it was a bifurcation. He appreciated the platform where he could go do what he did best, build the best and biggest airline in the world. From day one, this is what we're going to do, Oscar. He understood that you can't do that without the people underneath.
You laid the groundwork and he was able to build upon it. And you're comfortable with the fact that that's the way history will probably reflect it?
I certainly hope so. It's certainly the way it's playing out here. But the difficulty is who gets credit for what and how do you delineate and bifurcate those issues? It takes a leader to say, you know what, you're better at this than I, you go do this and you do this, but together let's stay aligned and working forward. And to the very end, he was always deferential in certain decisions because he knew they were mine to make, but we would talk about it beforehand. And at the end, I'm exec chair, he's CEO. We're making big decisions about investments that we can make while we're down, long-term decisions. And we're saying this to the board directly. Listen, any decision that has a lifespan beyond my tenure here needs to be Scott making it because he has to live with it. I don't.
Mhm.
As a leader, for all of us to get yourself in that mindset, it's not about you, but the people you lead. It sounds so easy. We all ascribe to it. We all think ourselves to that, but it is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
You're taking yourself out of a role. You're taking the limelight away from yourself and to others, but you're creating this platform for the future that is the best for everyone. That's a legacy that I think people will remember. Honestly, even if they don't, privately, personally, when I walk around,
You'll know.
yeah. Well, more than no, the people that have been there appreciate that. People at the lowest levels and at the highest levels, they just come up to you and shake your hand. And that look in the eye, it's a very gratifying thing. And you know that as we get to be more tenured in life, things that were once important become less important.
Mhm.
The things that are more human and personally gratifying and have enduring, lasting value for others, it really is a thing that helps me honestly sleep very well at night.
The listening tour, the concept of going and learning so much about people, you have mentioned that the path to true engagement and the release of someone's discretionary effort is capturing both their mind and heart. Discretionary effort is what we're all seeking as leaders because there's certain things people have to do when they show up, but it's what they do beyond that that really makes the difference between good and great.
Yeah. It's an understanding of how humans work.
Mhm.
I understand what you just said. I may not believe it. Or I believe in what you said, but I don't know how to do it. That's the cross of line that you have to do. You have to do both.
Mhm.
So what is discretionary effort? For all of us that have children, care and nurturing and safety of your child is 100 billion% discretionary. There is nothing you won't do for your child,
Mhm.
mostly.
Right.
That's 100%. We can't ask of that from you at work.
Mhm.
But there's 100% apathy. You could give a flying hoot about anything. There was a lot of the percentage of people at United at the time that were kind of in that camp, not because it was their personal philosophy to be apathetic and not care. You've driven them into that. How do you begin to drive them more towards the middle? And I had an old boss when I was at CSX who used a phrase that in any large organization, there are 10% of the people that are so supportive, you just want to kiss them every day. But there's another 10% who are so negative that just
Right. Yeah.
the 80% in the middle, if you do the math, are just seeing which of the two sides are winning. I always found that as a good grounding factor for me. Gee, I don't have to win everybody over. I just have to make that 10% of positive people just more than that. So the people in the middle begin to see that effort. So what came out of that listening tour was the heart I was capturing. They loved me. I cared for them. They really cared about me. They were in my every word and phrase, and I gave them credit. The mind about the work we had to do, growing, becoming more productive in certain areas, which meant cost adjustments. It meant certain leaders had to step away and go elsewhere. You have to make some tough decisions. But when you've captured their hearts and minds, hey, Oscar cares about us, but we have to make these tough decisions. The combination for the better good resonates with folks.
Yeah. So you're actually sitting in your condo in Utah right there, getting ready to go do some skiing. And I know you're passionate about fitness. In fact, you've run marathons in New York and Chicago. How does continuing to stay engaged in competition athletics fuel you even today?
Well, to self-promote, I've run 12 marathons. I've run a couple of triathlons.
Dang.
That's what made my heart situation such a great story, because I was indeed not just a weekend athlete. I had ridden a bike race 2 weeks before my heart attack, finished top 10% of my age group. I was generally fit, but heart disease is your plumbing and DNA that sometimes you don't know. The competitive angle,
Yes.
when you know it, you feel it. You understand training for something past a certain point gets you a little bit better result. It's knowing that when you're in the middle of a race, a marathon, there's a place called the wall. You hear about it, you read about it, and then you hit it.
Mm-hmm.
My son-in-law is about to run New York. The advice I've had, it's like, you're going to hit the wall. It's your first race. You're going to hit it. Here's what you got to do. You got to know it's coming, and you got to know it's going to pass. Keep pushing through it. And then when you're training, the harder you train, that wall may come later or may not come at all. That competitive angle is just such a prominent driver of all of us. It applies in your personal life and relationships. It applies in your business. It applies in helping others.
Mm-hmm.
People will take advice from people they feel are good examples for them. And when you've laid out good examples, they trust that what you say is meaningful, because it's easy to read a book that says, go do this and go do that. But when you hear it from someone that's sitting there really caring about you, it makes a big difference.
What a great lesson that is, especially as you tied it there to the discussion about discretionary effort.
Right.
Are you willing to push yourself? Because if you do, maybe the wall doesn't hit you as hard.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful in its own right.
Yeah.
Earlier in your career, you received some tough but valuable feedback during a performance review when you were at Coca-Cola. Can you share it with us?
Yeah, sure. One of the mistakes that almost all of us make constantly, where we feel we are very open to feedback. Oh yeah, no, I'm an open door and all that sort of stuff, is you're crossing your arms. It's tough to get feedback, and it's incredibly tough for people to be courageous enough to share it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a woman that I worked with at one of my companies who used the phrase, sharing is caring.
Mm-hmm.
Back to your own leadership philosophy, you have to accept these things as truisms, because when somebody's telling you something, they actually do care about you. It's like, Oscar, I wouldn't do those things because it creates this thing. If they didn't care, they would love for you to keep doing those things.
Yeah.
You know what? Drive off the cliff, big guy, knock yourself out. But the fact they take the time to interject, you have to accept that as a moment of, okay, let's stop. Let's get past yourself and your emotions. Ask yourself, why is this person telling me that? So when I was a young hotshot, I was the youngest at everything I did. I'd gotten a big promotion when I left Pepsi to go to Coke. I probably skipped almost 3 levels. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And I get into this new environment and I see that people are kind of slower. I think I'm just the hottest thing since sliced bread, until I have this conversation with my boss, who actually says all of the above things. Oscar, I took a risk on you at your age. God, you've exceeded our expectations. You're doing great at this. He shut the HR feedback mechanism book and slid it to the side. And he just taps it. He goes, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to share a couple of thoughts with you, more as a friend and not as an employer aspect. This is how cocky I was. It's like, all right, I think he wants me to date his daughter or something, right? It's like, can I adopt you as a son? Because I'm thinking to myself, it's so golden.
You're so amazing.
Yeah. And then he said these magic words. Listen, Oscar, you're really good at what you do, but you're not yet as good as you think you are.
Mm.
All right, that doesn't sound like he wants me to date his daughter. It doesn't sound, it's like, wait, what the heck was that? But when you sit back, accepting, reflecting, and then coming back and saying, I understand what he's saying. I'm kind of feeling full of myself. I am taking all these things on by myself. I'm not involving these people around me. I'm not taking the time to listen to them. Like this person, he's a Harvard MBA, you're not. So let's start there. And then the experience and knowledge that you have, it's one of the first steps I had in beginning to bridge gaps, listening to other people. Caring is sharing.
Mhm.
2 heads are better than one, and 10 heads are better than one. Being able to accept feedback.
Yeah.
The trick is realizing that somebody is telling you this because they do care about you.
Mm-hmm.
It's your parents that are normally giving you correcting action. Everybody else kind of lets you be. Unfortunately, you have to have some mishaps and you go down a path where you don't listen to others. Back to sports. The reason everybody has preordained things you had to do in a game of football is so that the play works. If you say, hey, I think I can get open and I'm going to run for the end zone, well, the quarterback's already handed the ball to the running back.
By the way, he can't throw it that far anyway.
Exactly. So, if you and I were peers and we went through a process and we got through it, me coming to your office, shutting the door and say, hey, Don, I'd really like to hear from you where I could improve how I handled myself during this thing. Because I know it got a little contentious. Just calling it out, very uncomfortable thing. But individually, in your heart and in your mind, you have to accept that that is a personal development improvement that's going to make you better over the long run.
Out of that experience at Coca-Cola, when you were in other situations, did you find yourself starting to go places, closing the door and asking for feedback?
Yes, that experience at Coca-Cola was the portal opening.
Mm-hmm.
But as you get through it and you understand it, you sort of revert back to what you in your mind has done. It's like, hey, I do things myself and they get done well, and I don't have to worry about them being wrong. So it took yet another screen a few years later when I was at corporate headquarters of Coca-Cola. I was just raised to be an officer of the corporation, which is a big thing. I am 31 years old. Similar situation to the earlier one. I find myself controlling everything. I never left my office without my coat and tie on. You came to my office when we needed to talk. I mean, it was just killing myself at a young age trying to control this need for perfection. Being a minority was part of that. There's a burden of perfection that, hey, is he, someone like him, supposed to be here?
Mm.
So that was part of it for sure. But it was also a personal thing where it's like, no, nobody can do this better than I can. And it took the unfortunate passing of my mother.
Mm.
When I went home for the funeral, I just realized how fleeting life can be. Life goes brutally on. I'm devastated about the loss of this incredible human in my life. But yet, literally the day after, everyone that's been in the funeral and weeping is now laughing and carrying on, and they're going back into their world.
Mm-hmm.
Oscar, what do you want to do when you go back to work? Because at a young age, you're already putting yourself in a grave by the way you're acting. So I went back with this more lucid approach to things. And first thing I did is I walked into one of the guys that worked from his office, a guy named Brad Wilson. He's shocked that I'm in his office, first of all. And then my question was, hey, how was your weekend?
Wow.
As trite as that sounds, I didn't do that. Oscar Munoz was like all business all the time. After the shock, I began to involve everyone. And all of a sudden, the ideas, the work product, the pace of work that we did, the development of others to succeed you, you became what we want in a boss. Somebody that is tough but fair, that listens, but also has an opinion, that makes decisions. Life just got so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I can leave a team to do this. And I know that on Wednesday, they're going to come back with something that's really workable and incorporate it. We'll be done by Friday. We'll have an amazing work product. And a lot of people will feel good other than me being stressed about it. So your life, it really does get easier.
Mm. It's sad that it took the passing of your mother to have that moment happen. But you know what? As you point out, sometimes the most important things that happen to us are not ones we're excited to reflect on. Oscar, I'm so grateful for the time today. I'm glad that you brought Mama Josefina into our lives and some of your stories. And I hope that you enjoyed being a corporate competitor with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. What an enjoyable time. I can only imagine what it must have been like, actually, to be at United Airlines going through 8 CEOs in 10 years, but then getting Oscar Munoz. What a nice gift. There were a number of great takeaways. Number one, it's never too late to do the right thing. His story about the incident with the customer on the plane, I remember all of it. In that moment, he actually turned the messaging around by just doing the right thing, owning it, beyond the ownership, actually saying it will never happen again on my watch. That's a pretty daring thing to say, because if it happens again, it's no longer your watch. And he pointed to his grandmother and the way that she had taught him about taking the upper road, how powerful that was. What a great lesson. The second was when he stepped in as the CEO, he went on that listening tour. I loved that every time when he was out on a ramp or maybe meeting with flight attendants, he would be looking for distinguishing items on that person that might tell him something that he can then try to learn from and ask questions about. You know what? In that moment, he no longer is CEO to employee, it's two people talking. How great is that? But then he also mentioned in that moment after he comes on board that he recognized that almost from the beginning, succession needs to start. And that if you're going to lead well, you have to start thinking about who's going to succeed you right from the very beginning of your tenure. Pretty powerful. And as he said, very difficult as a leader. And then the power of discretionary effort. It's not about you, it's about the people that you lead. And how do you get people to run through the wall, not just to the wall, by showing that you actually have an investment in them? He said from the leader at CSX who told him that 10% of the people are going to be with you, 10% will be the negative side. Those 80% in the middle are actually waiting to see which of the two 10% are going to win. So if you can, as a leader, encourage that discretionary effort from that top 10%, you can win the entire game. And then finally, I loved that lesson about accepting feedback being a learned skill and how difficult it was for him as a fast rising executive. That ability to recognize caring is sharing. And if someone's willing to give it to you, that is outside their comfort zone as well. Respect it, accept it, look at it as sharing as opposed to criticizing, and grow. What a powerful conversation. I am so glad you were with me for it today. I appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Feedback helps us spread the insights of our guests to a wider audience. It actually increases our ratings. Thank you so much for those who have done so in the past. And catch new episodes every Wednesday. Subscribe at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to be the first to get a chance to listen. And as a thank you gift, I will send you a chapter from one of my best-selling books. Stay connected with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. My handle is @DonYaeger, DonYaeger. And until next week, I appreciate you.